coming up on the Outside of Sunday podcast.
And about a year after they divorced, she got a boyfriend and ended up marrying him. And that was just a really tumultuous life and home to grow up in. There was a lot of like involvement of like child protective services when we were younger. And I was 19 when I got pregnant. As they were scanning the baby, they just, kind of got quiet. And I was like, I don't know, it's my first baby. I have no idea if they're just quiet because that's just what they do. But then shortly after, a doctor came into the room and just said that we needed to talk and that they had identified markers for a chromosomal disease called trisomy 18. And that renders that child incompatible for life. And so he like went from that right into his next sentence of, so we can schedule your termination for as early as tomorrow. And it's just like, what?
Listening to the Outside of Sunday podcast. I'm Krista, and here you'll find genuine conversations and inspiring testimonies, as well as biblical encouragement on how to live your faith in and outside of Sunday. Okay, welcome everyone to this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. It's a little bit different today because we are actually filming here in New Zealand, but also simultaneously in Brooklyn, New York, with my new friend Jenna. So thank you so much for being here, Jenna.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's really great to have you with us, and I'm so glad that we could connect. We have a mutual contact with Julie, so she hooked this up, and I so appreciate the chance to talk to you today. Before we get into your testimony and all that the Lord has done in your life, let's just hear a little bit
Thanks.
about you. What does life look like for you at the moment?
Sure. So I'm 35. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I have 5 kids. Married to my husband for about 7 years now, and it's just kind of chaos. So it's city living. We've moved here about 3 years ago to start church, and it's been a really big roller coaster, but at the same time, just a huge blessing. So it's just chaos. That's always what I use to just describe
Hmm.
what my day to day is with
Yeah,
a ton of kids.
and you've
So
got all the age ranges as well. You're in the thick of teenagers, and how old is your youngest?
oldest is 13 and youngest is 1.
That is a full and busy life, but so wonderful, right? It's so great to have children. My sister has
Yeah,
5.
it is good.
It's fun.
Never a dull moment.
As I said, you have a story to share. You have a testimony to share. And it's one that when we initially chatted, you said it was messy, I suppose was the word that you used. But let's start at the beginning before we get into the mess with Jesus. Can you tell us a little bit about what life was like for you
Yeah.
growing up and yeah, how it all started out for you?
So I grew up in New Jersey actually, and my parents were together. We attended a Baptist church growing up, and so my first you know, probably encounter with Jesus was at this Baptist church. I was about 7 years old, and then 10 years old, my parents actually ended up getting divorced. And so that's when things sort of really started to change. So I'm one of 6, with one of those being a step sibling who we love very much. And so it just it just started to look very different. So my father moved to a town over. My mother, who used to teach me Sunday school, stopped attending altogether. My dad was very much still involved, and he would do all like the landscaping and the grounds of the church. And so that was definitely it was a very challenging time as like a 10-year-old, not knowing kind of like all your stability gets kind of moved about. Um, and so yeah, I mean, I think most of my positive memories as a child have to do with church or like my one of my first missions trip to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So like a lot of my really positive and sweet memories as a child are at the church I grew up in.
Mm. And so, what did life kind of look like for you in terms of like your faith? Would you describe yourself as a Christian, or was it more just that was part of your family, that was part of your culture, or were you kind of really in a relationship with the Lord that young?
Yeah, no, I think it would probably just be almost like a piggyback off of my parents, right? And so it's like that's just kind of what we did. We went to church on Sundays and to Pioneer Girls on Wednesdays. And so I very much believed everything I was being taught, but I mean, I can confidently say that I didn't own that as my own personal relationship, um, the way I would, later down the line, about 16 years old. So it was definitely like, I knew all the stories and I understood what the gospel meant. and I believe I was still saved. I feel like God would have agreed with me should something have happened to me at a young age. But um, no, I think that it's been very, yeah, it's a time that I knew Jesus was real, but I just didn't know what that meant for me specifically. I just knew that our family was going to learn about him,
Mm.
and that's kind of that.
And so, how did things progress from there? Because 10 years old, you say your life was dramatically kind of changed. Did that um,
Yeah.
did that affect your teen years, your relationship with the Lord at all?
Yeah, I would say it did, but only in the sense of that, again, like I don't think it was necessarily my own at that moment. And so I was just very confused. I had my mom would teach me Sunday school, and then one day she just didn't come again. And about a year after they divorced, she got a boyfriend and ended up marrying him. And that was just a really tumultuous life and home to grow up in. Um, there was a lot of like involvement of like child protective services when we were younger, and just this man was like very, very abusive, and I just didn't know how. Like I was confused more so how like it could go from we had this stable home where like she was teaching me about Jesus, and it just seemed like there was an about face. Um, and because of the dynamic of like the abuse and also having an additional sibling coming into the play, I just think i didn't I didn't filter any of that through like, God, what are you doing, more so as like, I guess this is what it is now, but
Mm.
I'll go to church with dad on Sundays because he'll go.
Mm.
But not like you know when I was little, it's this kind of like maybe like a little bit of a tangent, but one of the biggest things I remember, when I was like maybe like 8 or 9, I always had terrible stomach aches as a child. Like, I don't know what it was. I just always had really bad stomach aches. And I remember I would just pray, Lord, I will do anything for you if you just make my stomach stop hurting. And there was a couple times that I just felt like I can recall, like, oh, well, he hears me. My stomach doesn't hurt anymore. So like there's like the moments I can recall of like a 7-year-old or 8-year-old faith would be like those sort of moments, and not necessarily like, God, what are you going to do with all this brokenness? Right. I don't think I had the words or like the context for any of that at that age.
Yeah, that is a lot for a young person, let alone a young Christian as well
Yep.
to deal with. So, what happened though with you? Like after that time, did you stay with your mom, and then did you go out on your own into the world, or did you live with your dad?
I initially lived with both of them when they had like 50-50 custody. So I would go half with my mom, half with my dad. And there was 5 of us, because of course the step was always with my mom. And so we would go back and forth a lot. And because of the abuse in the home, I ended up leaving my mom's house at about 16, and I went to go live with my dad full time. And he was just in like a town over. So I still went to like my high school in the town that I like used to live in. We would just take like car service to high school. It was kind of strange, but that's just like how we made it work, because otherwise I would have had to switch my whole school. And so yeah, I moved with him, and then I ended up I had a boyfriend my freshman year of high school who asked me to go to prom, and he was a junior. And he used to get, this is like a funny aside, like he used to get his hair highlighted. He was very into skateboarding, but he needed like blonde streaks in his hair.
Frosted tip.
So when we were going to prom, his mom asked me if she, right, so his mom had asked me if she could like pay for my hair to get done. And so I ended up like agreeing, and the woman who did my hair began to talk to me about Jesus. And I said like, oh, I know, I'm saved. I know about Jesus. Um, and so it's actually, just talking about it out loud, I realized that's actually how I came to know Julie, was through this woman, Kimmy, who allowed me to live with her. Like, I'm just, as we're talking about it, I'm like,
Wow.
oh yeah, that's how I know Julie. So yeah, so God was obviously doing something. And I ended up living half the time with her, half the time with my dad. Um, and she was just like a really strong, godly woman. And she ended up bringing me to a different church, which is how I also met Julie, when I was 16, and I started attending their youth group there. And that's when I can say like that faith became my own. Like it was strange to me that I went to youth group and people were like reading their Bibles because they wanted to and like writing in them and like raising their hands to worship. I was like, what? Okay. So that's I think I can like pinpoint that as a time where I'm like, this is my relationship with Jesus. Um, and let's see what this looks like.
Mhm. And so, what happened with the boyfriend? Did you stay together, or because I know
No.
at some point you had a partner and you had a child together. So, was that guy?
No, no, it was not. Um, that boyfriend broke my heart. Just kidding. No, I ended up I I ended up dating somebody when I was 18. I was living full time with actually Kimmy, this woman. Um, I was just graduating high school, and then I actually went away to a Bible college in Marietta, California for a semester, and we were like dating long distance. He he wasn't a believer, but I think I just didn't care at that point because he would go to Bible studies with me. So I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, all right. And then I ended up leaving Bible college, like, or like not returning for another semester because I like missed him so much. And then so we ended up, you know, remaining together, and that's when I got pregnant with my first child.
So, can you tell us about that season in your life?
For sure. So I was 19 when I got pregnant, and then I was 20 when I delivered. But and I'm not exactly sure if it's the same sort of like timestamps in New Zealand of like OBGYN care. But as far as like pregnancy, when you have like an anatomy scan at about 5 months, and that's when you find out like the gender, but they also measure all the organs. And so um, we weren't in a really great relationship to begin with. It was quite toxic prior to pregnancy and during pregnancy. And so something had happened where I didn't even want him to come, but my mom came and he came. And so as they were scanning the baby, they just, kind of got quiet. And I was like, I don't know, it's my first baby. I have no idea if they're just quiet because that's just what they do. Um, but then shortly after, a doctor came into the room and just said that we needed to talk and that they identified markers for a chromosomal disease called trisomy 18, and that that renders that child incompatible for life. And so he like went from that right into his next sentence of, so we can schedule your termination for as early as tomorrow. And it's just like, what? Well, I don't want to do that. Um, and so the only way to know certainly was to get an amniocentesis where they would test the amniotic fluid to see if the baby did in fact have that chromosomal disease. And they did that, and we got some fast results within 10 days that it was positive. And then, the full 2 weeks later it was also positive. So, um, you know, with this condition, babies who um, the majority of babies with trisomy 18, they actually pass away in utero, so they don't really even make it to live birth. Um, and I think during that time, I almost believe that my faith was even stronger than it was when I first like would profess to know Jesus, because I truly believed that like God was going to heal my baby, and everybody was going to see that like he was going to do a miracle, and they're all going to believe on Jesus, and his life was going to be such a testimony. And it's just not the way it happened, except for that God did heal him, right? Like he went to heaven. And so he was born at 38 weeks. They had induced me, hoping that I could meet him alive. So he was born at 38 weeks. He was 3 pounds and 2 ounces. And if you've ever seen the movie Benjamin Button, he was like a wrinkly little old man. It was so cute. He was so cute. And so, yeah, I mean, he lived for 54 minutes, and it ended up being an emergency C-section. So there was a lot a lot of movement. His heart rate had dropped. And um, yeah, it was pretty, it was pretty challenging. But in that same token, I feel that I haven't had many moments in my walk with the Lord where I feel like I want to preface this right. So like the Lord has met me so much, but there are times that stick out where I'm like, it's unmistakable that
Mm.
he was like near me. And so when I went from like trying a natural delivery to having to do an emergency C-section, I had already had an epidural to like numb me during the natural labor. And so I had to quickly shift into the section. So they were hopeful I would still be numb. And they ended up just asking me like, okay, let us know if you feel this, if it's just pressure or is it really sharp? And I remember just saying like, that's really, really sharp. I knew I felt the pain, but it was like this blanket of peace and just that like be anxious for nothing. Like I was certain my baby was going to die. I knew that I was feeling a lot of physical pain, but more than any of that, I just knew that like Christ was in the room. So that was like super, like that is, I don't know if I'll ever have a moment like that again, but that was really very, very special.
That's so moving, Jenna. And I'm so thankful for the goodness of God to have met you like
Mm.
that in that season. It's
Yeah.
incredible. And even like as you're saying, you should be in agony with this pain that you're feeling and agony in your spirit and in your soul. But the Lord just meeting you so beautifully. Just so thankful for God's goodness and that He was so close to you. But I gotta say,
Yeah.
it's remarkable just how much strength and confidence you had to say, first of all, no to the doctors saying, okay, now let's schedule your termination. And then also just even, I mean, I don't know, did you wrestle with the fact that you did have all this faith that your baby was going to be a testimony, that your baby was going to be healed, and then now you had to say goodbye?
Yeah, but I think the way that I wrestled with it was like afterward, because meaning that like, you know, the moments of like I'm leaving the hospital, they wheel you out. And anytime you see a mom being wheeled out, she has her baby in her arms. So I'm leaving the hospital with no baby. So I'm like, okay, well, what do I do now? And then we had his funeral and he was buried the day before Mother's Day. And so I think I just wrestled like, what was my purpose? Like for what? You know? And I don't even know that I was angry with God. I didn't understand it. And I had talked with somebody, one of the pastors at the church I was attending at the time, and he said that like you have an opportunity here to like get a depth to your character and allow the Lord to like shape that in a way that like other people just don't, by lack of experience with that sort of loss, don't have the opportunity to step into. And so it's really up to you what you decide to do in this moment. And so I I was like, yes, Lord, I love you. But I think just for now, I'm just gonna like be myself. And again, I wasn't, I didn't really know what to do. So, and even that following year is a bit of a blur. It's very, I think it's a way that like almost like your mind and God's designed your mind to kind of protect you, for maybe some more painful stuff. So I definitely, I can recall his birth. I recall his funeral. I recall like the couple days after. And then there's just a period of time um, before I find out that I'm pregnant with my next child that I'm like, I couldn't account for that time. I just know I was really broken.
And how did that loss affect your relationship with your partner?
Yeah, I mean, it affected it a lot. Our relationship was quite toxic prior to the pregnancy, during the pregnancy, and very much so after. So he did have another child that was older than my son who passed away. And so there was immediately this like disconnect because he could go hold a baby and I couldn't hold a baby. Um, and there was just a lot of like um hurt surrounding the situation because you just can't tell somebody how to grieve. And so the only other person who has like the memory of like my child is the other parent, but he wasn't really willing to share in that. Um, and it's not even like I could fault him because it's just really, really difficult. Um, but I just, yeah, he kind of to this day, we get along fine, but to this day, if I were to ask, he doesn't really have much to share. I don't have like a lot of recollection of like those, like the moments I share with you are what I remember.
Mm.
Anything else is like based off pictures because with general anesthesia, I just haven't had, I don't have those physical memories. I just have like what I shared and then some photos. So
I know that the partner that you had, this baby, what was your son's name? It was a boy, wasn't it?
yes, Noah.
Noah. So Noah's dad was still on the picture for a little while after that, was he? Can you tell us about how that kind of relationship came to end and then the journey of meeting your now husband?
So when it came to like uh the the next part of that relationship, it was just kind of like tumultuous. I ended up getting pregnant again and having another child, and
How,
that is like my heart healer, like my sweet. He's 13 now.
that's what I would like to know is
Yeah,
like,
go
how
ahead.
was that for you getting pregnant the second time? Did you have any fears with that? Or did the Lord give you
Oh,
peace?
yeah.
Walk us through that, please.
I was so afraid. I was afraid at every moment. And it didn't matter that like I could know intellectually that like my first child, like Noah had a chromosomal abnormality. Like there was just that's just what it was. And my son Cruz is his name. So Cruz's testing was all perfect and normal, but I didn't believe it. Right. It was not until I had him in my arms, I was like, okay, he's mine. Um, and I would count the kicks, and again, like that, the relationship even throughout that was really quite tumultuous. And so I believe that God like allowed me to see that like this was not it was not going to be like um we weren't going to be like a family. We were going to co-parent at best at that time, and it was going to really be up to me to figure out how I was going to you know be a single mom and figure that out. And I mean, God was even gracious in that. So um I think Cruz was probably just a few weeks old when that relationship pretty much just ended. It's, when things run their course, you kind of just know, and you're like, okay, you're done, I'm done. Okay. So,
Mhm.
um, and then, so I had actually met my husband now at that youth group that I was brought to by that woman, Kimmy. We went to youth group together. So we met when we were like 15 or 16. Um, but he had like a mullet and it was many different colors. And he was in a screamo band and it just wasn't my vibe. Like it just wasn't. So but he was always so sweet. Like he was always so sweet. And we had like the same friend group. But yeah, it wasn't my vibe. But in between Noah and Cruz's dad, there was a different partner I had prior to like pursuing any sort of relationship with my husband. And I had two other children with this person, and they are the only bright spot of that relationship. I I think that one of the reasons that my husband, and we'll hear more, but like amazes me in the way that he is and how he carries himself, um, and how I almost had such an aversion to it when we began dating, is I had just not been used to healthy and not been used to safe, and that relationship previous to my husband was incredibly physically and verbally abusive. And um, it was very difficult to like step from that, into this other, and how would that make any sense? And to believe that he would even, you know, want to take me and all my children on. So, um, yeah, so that there was a relationship in between that had to be gone first.
Can I ask you about those relationships? Because I'm interested to know what you think now, like looking back, why that was kind of a bit of a pattern is to have a relationship with these men who were toxic, as you described, were abusive physically and verbally. You were a daughter of the king, you had a relationship with the Lord. What was it, do you think, that actually led you to commit to those kind of relationships?
Yeah, I think that when it came to that relationship, specifically with um, with my two children who are now 10 and 8. I'm like, how old are they? When it came to that specific relationship, um, I'm how old is everybody? I had already felt that I failed in the relationship of like not being able to give, Noah passed away, and then my son Cruz and the relationship with his father didn't work out. And so like I was not able to give Cruz like a family. And that wasn't how I saw and how I thought it was going to go. And so when I entered into this next relationship, it didn't start off from the bat just really terrible. It was actually great, and it was slowly over time. It was just this thought that I just had to make it work because I had already just in my this is my only other chance kind of thing is how I thought. And I just saw this brokenness in this person that I really believed I could fix and I could help. And we had these kids together, and I came from a broken family, and I just didn't want to have my kids have that same thing. Um, but I hit a point in that where I realized that like this is and my mom knows this, and I love her deeply and dearly. And if she ever listens to this, she knows this by far. But I got to a point where I'm like, I am walking into what I grew up in, and if I don't get out of it, I'm not going to give them any different experience I've ever had of what it looks like to be like loved. And there was a specific moment when I was anytime I've ever had like any revelation or any quiet time period, I'm in the shower because that's the only time no one bothers me. Or I should say bothers, that sounds mean. Nobody interrupts me. So, um, and I just remember, I wasn't walking with the Lord. Like I had this conviction. I was sometimes popping in and out of church with this, partner, and he would show interest and attend meetings for sobriety because he did have a drug issue that were Jesus based. And so I would see these hopeful moments and I would just hang on and hang on. Um, but there's was a moment when I was just in the shower and I just felt the Lord just put this verse on my heart, and I didn't even know where it was. But it's the verse where it says, "No good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly." And I just asked myself, like, how are my children ever going to know the gospel and the goodness of God if this is how I decide to raise them? Like, I can't tell them how good Jesus is and then allow them to see and be treated in a way that's just so harmful and unsafe. Um, and so that was when I kind of got the boldness to leave the relationship. And I think that once I was able to be on the other side of it, uh, I recognized so much more of the abuse and so much more of the dysfunction on the other side of it, even before I entered into a healthy relationship. Um, but I think I hung on so long because I just wanted to have a family. And I just felt like I would see these improvements. And I know that God, like, I believed God could like restore this person. Um, and I just was like kind of waiting. But it was very clear that the Lord was like, if I'm going to give you great things, but you have to like give me less great things back. Like, you have to give that to me so I can give you something better. And that was really painful because it was like number two, messed up this one too.
Did you manage to leave safely? And what was it like for you in that first little while being actually on your own now with your kids?
I left safely for sure. I did like obtain restraining orders at different points in time just because that's what needed to happen. Um, there was only a very short period of time we actually even lived together. I almost always just lived on my own and he would come and go as he pleased. So that was more of like I was engaged for a short time to him, and about 2 months later I had just broken that engagement off, and that's like when the Lord kind of was just like, Jenna, I have something for you. Um, but keeping the children safe was not as easy as it was to keep myself safe. So it did take a few years to have it like um recognized by like a judge that they weren't safe. And so that was, additionally painful because although I had made the choice to leave this relationship, I had to wait for like a court to agree with me that this person wasn't safe. And in order to do that, you have to like provide that evidence. And so that it was a very challenging time for sure. And that actually bled into when I was like that happened while I was married. So like they weren't kept safe until a few years into our marriage. So that
Wow.
was interesting.
I guess you're right. You don't always think about that, is that you could get out, but they're still his father. I never really kind of thought about it like that, but you're so right. How old were the kids during that time? Were they still quite young?
Yeah, yep. My daughter, when I broke off the engagement, my daughter was 4 months old, and my son was, here comes the math. He's 2 years young, so he was like 2.5 or
Okay.
almost three.
And so you've left this relationship now. You're obviously taking steps to keep your children safe with, proving evidence to a judge and all of that. And while all this is going on, at some point you meet or what's the word? Like reconnect with
Yeah.
your husband.
So the way that that happened was whenever I speak about like my testimony, I there's this like one line that I just feel like probably perfectly describes my walk. Is like I just would walk in and out of obedience. So I would be like doing really well for like a year and like following up the Lord and like abstaining from things that were harmful to me. And then I would just like fall off and be like, oh, I've messed up. It's too late now. And then I would go back. So it was the end of 2017. So my daughter was born in March. So she was maybe like 6 months old. So about 2 months after like I had broken off that engagement. And I just popped into a Wednesday night service because um I felt like I had to. And my husband ended up being the person who was teaching. He was the youth pastor there at the time. And so on Wednesdays, they would often have like either like a guest teacher or the youth pastors teach, or maybe like the young adults pastor or whoever. And so he was teaching and he just shared. Um, I mean, like I couldn't even give you the full like topic of the message aside from he shared out of Hebrews 10, verse 14. And I specifically wrote this down because although I love this verse, I will butcher it and I need to say it in order because of how it ministered to me. Um, so let me get my little card out here so I don't mess it up. But
Yeah.
so he was sharing and he was,
You have
sorry,
something
go
on
ahead.
your lip.
No, so I actually have my lip pierced. So
I was like,
is it like shimmering?
I
It's
have to
so
tell her,
funny.
like, sorry, I'm just
Don't
trying
be
to be a
sorry
good
because
friend.
literally all the time they're like, you have a little glitter. You have a little glitter. I'm like, no, it's a piercing. But it's tiny because it's a nose ring because I wanted it to be like delicate. I've had it for like 11 years and I should probably like be 35 and take it out, but I just can't let go.
No, it's just
Um,
the camera
so here we go.
quality. Like, there's no way that I could have I can see, But now, okay, great.
No, for sure, for sure. It's like glimmering. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Like, especially if there's some on my face, I'd want to know. So thank you.
Great.
But he was speaking out of Hebrews, and he had just shared Hebrews 10:14, and it says, "It's for by a single offering, like Christ, he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified." And it was just like this light bulb went off in my head, and it was like, okay, yeah, like I know everything I've done. I'm aware of it. He's aware of it. But if he like by a single offering, like if his life was enough, which I believe it was, I believe it is for everybody else. So I have to believe it is for me as well. And if he's perfected me for all time, so it doesn't matter what direction I walk in, he's perfected me. I mean, there's pain if I'm not going to walk with him. Um, but the sanctification process just takes time. And so I ended up like writing him an email the next morning about his message. And I had just said that like, I just wanted to like let you know that your message really spoke to me, specifically this verse. And I just wonder like what would have happened if I'd only been obedient. Like if after like, I had made my own choices and now don't hear me wrong, like every single child is a gift of God, right? And that was a blessing through all of the like chaos. But I had been through like losing a child, a bunch of domestic abuse and just I hadn't shared, but like I walked through an eating disorder. Like there was a lot of stuff that just like happened. And even though all of that happened and there was the wonderful like children that came out of there, like I just wonder what would have my life looked like if I just had been obedient. And so when he wrote me back, he didn't write me back like, yeah, I wonder. Like, wish you would have been obedient. Like, he was just so like, hey, but like, look at Paul. Like, it's never too late for God to use somebody. And he uses all of that stuff too. And so it's like all that you really need to do is just like surrender that. and let him meet you where you are. And so, yeah, it was very encouraging. And again, like we had shared friend groups, so it wasn't like I would never see him. My partner before him wasn't very fond of him. So we did pop in from time to time, and this is just like a funny aside. And anytime I would pop in, like my husband would be, well, he wasn't my husband at the time, Alan. Alan would be doing the announcements, and my partner, who was not fond of him, would be like, "Oh, look who's doing the announcements." And I was like, "Okay." And my dad had invited my partner at the time to a men's breakfast at the church I grew up in, and my husband was the guest speaker. So it was like all along, the Lord was just like, "This is her
Wow.
husband. Just let her go. Just let her be released." Um, but that's just like a funny aside. Uh, yeah, and so we kind of just began talking back and forth. I kind of continue to plug back into church. He's a really good rock climber. He boulders, and he could tell you the date, the time, and everything else. I don't know exactly how we got like better connected, but we started dating. So that was 2017 December when he preached, and we started dating in July of 2018. So not too long went by. And then we got engaged in October of 2018, and then we were married in February of 2019. So it was like bam, bam, bam. And I will say he planned our whole wedding. So I just feel like everyone in the world needs to know that about him. He planned every single thing.
Wow. And so, what was kind of going through your mind and through your heart during that time when you were like, here is this man who loves me and he wants to marry me and he is good and he loves Jesus? What was going through your mind?
I think that, I mean, I was just like in disbelief that somebody would want me after just everything that kind of like came with me. Like I knew my children were awesome and wonderful and like were the best, but it's still like a lot to enter into that space of like you're an instant dad to three kids. And like, you might have been a youth pastor, but it's still very different. Um, and so I always felt, and it took a long time for this to kind of go away, or not go away, but for me to be able to like um, combat the lie with what Christ actually has to say about me. And that is that like he was somehow above me. Like I believed that because he was a pastor and had like waited for me till marriage, and he had never been drunk, and he had, never done all the things I had done, that he was just like better. And I felt in some ways um, that I took away from his goodness. Um, and I do think that there were probably some other people who might have agreed with that. But there are also, um, people who spoke really a lot of life into us. Um, and something that my husband had shared just when talking about our relationship and how that kind of, how that unfolded in the beginning and how that walked into a marriage is there are just people that Alan can minister to that I just will never be able to. And it's not that I wouldn't want to, it's just that I don't have that life experience. I just can't relate to that. And then there's just people that Alan cannot relate to that I can. And so God can use us together to reach a very wide variety of humans. Um, and just because his testimony is less messy doesn't mean it's better.
Mhm.
Um, and I've actually learned, and this isn't like, I almost prefer the messy testimony because I can speak into it and I can relate. It's hard for me to feel like I can encourage somebody who I haven't walked through that
Mhm.
on the other side of it.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. So you're married to the man of your dreams. You've got your three kids. And then do you have children? What kind of happens from there?
We get married. He moves into my apartment, which is just funny because he had lived home until we got married. So we just say he came with a suitcase and lived out of a suitcase for months because I was like, I don't know where we're going to put your stuff. It's like, I already have my setup. Um, just, between parenting and marriage, what a way to reveal how selfish a human being can be. Like I was just so selfish. Um, but yeah, I ended up while we were dating and engaged, I worked for an electric company in New Jersey. And so I would read electric meters 6 hours a day in all weather. And the kids would be at daycare, and he was still a pastor. And so he worked at the church. And then the church ended up opening up a women's center, um, and like a mobile pregnancy center where they were like fully medical and could scan for women facing unplanned pregnancies. And so that's obviously my background of unplanned pregnancies. And so I ended up at a women's retreat, and I heard this woman share, and she was messy, and she had lost a child, and she had just walked through some roads I'd also walked down. And so I wanted to talk to her. And so I went up to her and I spoke with her. And it ended up just a few months later, she was one who opened the women's center. And so she hired me. And so I could leave that like god awful job of like, is there going to be a dog in the backyard or not? With like an insane farmer's tan, wearing t-shirts all day. Um, to this, now I'm like in ministry full time. Our kids are going to school at the church's school because we got to have his pastoral discount, which was nice. And so like it's looking pretty like stable in that aspect. It feels a little abnormal. We're still dealing with the partner before. There was not a set schedule for any of the parenting time prior to me getting married, and something that my husband had really asked that we focus would be to get like an actual schedule handled. And so that was very difficult because that partner was not somebody who felt that they needed to abide by a schedule and that they should be able to come in to their children's life and come and go as they pleased, whatever that looked like. Um, and based on like my reaction that to that person has always been fear. Um, and I would cave, right? And I would just be like, it's okay. But now I had this person who's like standing up for me, but I'm also afraid that he's rocking the boat too much. So I'm not totally like submitting to like what he would be wanting because I'm afraid that in my head, I'm like, he does not know what this man can do. Like he just doesn't know. And so that was challenging. Um, we were in we spent a good amount of I would say his savings. I don't think I brought any savings into the marriage. His savings on lawyers and, court orders. And so even on our honeymoon, like just for like a perspective, on our honeymoon, we went to Ireland for 2 weeks almost. It was amazing. But during that time, that parent did have that previous partner had parenting time. And he refused to return that child back until I was home. And so essentially, legally, that's like a kidnapping. So I'm in another country and he will not let me speak to my child unless I agree to like FaceTime when he says. And so like our marriage was just, it stepped into a situation of an instant dad to three with this very combative other parent. Um, and this inability to really keep them safe without getting like legally in trouble because I had to abide by what I was ordered to do. Um, and I know that God, it was just protected them just so much. There's so many instances that it just could not have been good for them, specifically my son. And God just was so faithful to protect him. And so eventually, um, I'm still working at the Women's Center. My husband's still pastoring, and he had always wanted to plant a church in Brooklyn. That was discussed prior to us really even seriously dating. And I was like, sure, sounds good. I think in my head, I was like, we'll see.
Mhm.
I have 3 kids. You're gonna see it's not gonna be, you don't want to move to Brooklyn once you have 3 kids. But he's also just knew where God was calling him. So uh, we're getting ready to try to move to Brooklyn. Um, and again, we have to go through things legally. And so right before we were kind of getting ready to get things in place with that, um, we had a court hearing where that other parent did not show up and they had their rights terminated, or at least terminated until other things were completed. And so that was, I believe it's going to be 6 years ago in this October, and he hasn't been in their life since. Um, and so it changed things for us because it gave us like all of a sudden the chaos was just gone. and we could move forward in the next season of life, which was, okay, what does it look like to go and plant this church? And that was just really hard. I wasn't certain that he was gone. I felt that he would, pop up. And we had our daughter Nova. She's 4 now. And so we had her, she was a COVID baby. She was in 2020. And that was, that was like right, maybe like a year after or 2 years after the kids had stopped being able to see their father. And I don't know, like life was good, but it was just challenging. There's a lot of moving parts. And I think anybody in ministry or not in ministry or just anyone who loves Jesus knows that like, as you step into things, like it's the enemy doesn't like thieves don't rob empty houses. The enemy sees something happening and he's going to infiltrate that in whatever way he is allowed. And I say allowed because I believe that for myself, like, and again, we'll probably get into this shortly, but just a series of small compromises. And then you find yourself in a place that you never thought you'd be.
Coming up next week on the Outside of Sunday podcast.
I had a choice and I did not make the right one. But I also believe that like in sharing this, it can help other women who are either in the position that I was in, or maybe they're about to enter that position. In 2021, I had an affair and that imploded our life. It was very painful, specifically because just all of it ended up going viral. But it wasn't just painful for me. It was also painful for that other spouse who had her entire life ripped from her. One day, I will forever be very aware that I was the source of this woman's pain. And that's mine. I have to own that.
Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. If something made you laugh or cry or think a little deeper, please give this episode a like and leave us a comment. Your feedback blesses us and we want to bless you right back. So every comment automatically goes in the draw for our monthly giveaway. Who knows, I might even read your comment out in a future episode. And hey, sharing is caring, so don't forget to let somebody you know about this podcast. Outside of Sunday is part of the Outsider Network and is made with the help of Inspirational Media.